Hi, I'm Ros Cardinal, and welcome to the Shaping Change interview series, Beyond the Book. Today, I'd like to introduce Todd Thomas with his book Hyperscale. Todd is a recognised voice in AI, energy, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and is the best-selling author of Unleashing Abundant Energy trilogy. Todd has built his career harnessing emerging technologies to drive efficiencies and create new commercialisation opportunities across industries. Todd is the founder and CEO of Woodchuck AI, a climate impact startup dedicated to transforming waste into value, reducing landfill usage, and unleashing an abundant energy future. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. All right, well, we'll kick off. Now, your book, Hyperscale, is new, and in it you argue that data centres are becoming the beating heart of the global economy. What are leaders still underestimating about this shift?
Well, it's a rapidly evolving change, but I think what we're seeing is data centers are in response to the growing demand for AI services. In order to meet that demand, we have to build more data centers. So that's the biggest surge in construction nationwide and globally is data centers. Along with this is a massive requirement for new energy. The old approach of trying to find a location that has available energy is tapped out. The US energy grid has no excess capacity. I mean, you see rolling blackouts in California, Texas, and New York. And so, if you want to build a data center, you really need a new approach. And I'd say that the trend that we are seeing growing rapidly is the bring your own power. So, in order to build your data center, you are also going to build some type of power generation. Now, at the same time, data centers are getting a lot of pushback from local communities worried about their energy prices. And so one way to combat this really lines up with bring your own energy. And that is where the data center builds enough energy capacity with excess energy. So they're not just generating enough power to run their data center, they're also feeding power back to the local grid. And in some circumstances, Google's actually been really good at this, actually decreasing local energy costs where they build a new data center.
Interesting. So, if I'm a CEO or a public sector leader who's not in tech, why should this matter to me now and not in, say, 5 years' time?
Well, I think it's important right now because energy sourcing is a part of any site selection. So it doesn't matter if you're in manufacturing or retail, whatever your vertical is, the energy source for your locations is important. It's a big factor in location. And with data centers being built, tons in Virginia, tons in Texas, a lot in the Midwest, it's going to affect local energy costs. There's also considerations of not just is there power for your site, but what is the source of that power? There is still let's say, growing public demand and awareness of the source of power. So is your energy coming from coal plants or is it coming from a solar farm? And that can make a really big difference on the public perception of your locations and therefore your company. It has a big impact on branding. So again, companies are becoming more and more aware of this. It requires more research. So whatever your vertical is, you need to be aware of the power requirements of your facilities and where that power is coming from.
So, we describe this as a new industrial revolution. Now, what are the leadership behaviours that you think are going to be required going forward? What's the shift in leadership thinking?
Well, I do think there will be response, and we're going to drive a massive increase in global energy capacity. So we are going to have the AI tools available to us, and so I think every leader really needs to view that kind of moving past the energy conversation into the technology conversation, which is AI to some extent is just the latest emerging technology. It's the newest tool, but it's really different. It is so much more powerful. It really changes the landscape where previous technology tools were tools and we used them, but they were largely limited to the IT department. And you might have someone come in your office and update your software, but it wasn't dramatically changing your productivity. AI is a huge shift. AI is not just a passive tool. It's an interactive partner that's driving productivity. And so I think leadership that embraces that and really learns how to use AI tools and makes the right selection of the right tools for their company and their vertical At one point I would say they would have a huge advantage, but I think we've gotten to the point where AI is so ubiquitous, that's no longer the case. Everyone is using it. If your company is not embracing AI and not getting the productivity gains of AI, you're really putting your company at a disadvantage at this point.
Mm. Yeah, it's certainly exploded just in the last couple of years. I mean, I was sort of an early adopter when ChatGPT very first came out, 2022 now, and now it's everywhere. Like everyone's using it. It's embedded in everything. I just recently saw an announcement from Microsoft saying it was, Copilot is now going to have much more, operating a lot more like, say, Claude Bot. So it's going to be really interesting to see where the world takes us. I mean, this is obviously not a conversation for today, but around things like, employment, what does it actually mean for people in particularly white collar jobs at the moment? Watch this space, I guess.
Well, I think AI is really good at replacing repetitive tasks, even complex repetitive tasks. If they are rules driven repetitive tasks, AI is great at replacing that. But that doesn't necessarily have to mean a reduction in employment. It can mean, you can view it as a force multiplier, allowing you to get more productivity out of the teams that you have. Coding, that's a great example. Coding used to take a lot of individual engineers or developers to develop software. So if you had a team of 5 developers, you might have one lead and 4 coders. Now you can take that same team, those same 5 coders, but each one becomes a lead, and they each have their own, set of 4 or 5 AI agents developing code underneath them. So now this same team can develop 5 times the software, and often in a shorter time frame and with less errors, because AI can also debug it for you. So you can get dramatically more productivity out of the same team.
And that's an interesting shift, I think, because the conversation that we're hearing at the moment is about job losses. So we're seeing the announcements like, Amazon cutting 4,000 jobs, I think I saw just recently. So a lot of whether or not that actually reflects the reality of the world, or whether it's more the news cycle, it's jumping on the job losses as the story of the day. But I think there's a shift there to be made in terms of leadership around this, into productivity and into increasing production or increasing whatever it is that you do, rather than using it as a way to cut jobs. So I know we've sidebarred away from what we were originally going to talk about, but thank you, that was useful.
Sure.
So you talk about the growth in AI-driven energy demand, which is obviously going to just continue to happen. So where do you think leaders have been overly optimistic or maybe even naive around AI adoption?
Well, AI certainly doesn't solve every problem. It is a tool that has, great strength and great application across a lot of areas. Um, but AI has a lot of shortcomings as well. AI has no concept of truth, right? The legal fields have seen that a lot. AI models are very well known now for hallucinating sources and just making stuff up, right? So there's that issue. AI is not good at unique high-level problems. It's good at repetitive problems and rules-based problems. So you can't replace the human brain with a high-level, complex, unique problem. There's no comparison to the human brain. And as we talk about AI, to get to general AI, which is where the actual intelligence, we're nowhere close to that. And so AI is a very useful tool, and figure out the right way to use it for your company, but it is not a silver bullet that solves all problems. It's a great productivity instrument.
Mm. I find it a great brainstorming partner. So what I'll do is, if I come up with a new idea for something, I'll feed it into AI, or use ChatGPT or Claude, and actually ask it to pick it apart. Like, what's wrong with this? What are the problems? What can you see? And it's really quite good at that. I find that it's very useful for refining ideas. So you're right, it doesn't replace the human brain, but can certainly help. I find it
Yeah, no,
quite
I
concise things
agree.
I wouldn't think.
And interesting too is if you're, you have an idea that you want to expand on, or, if you're writing something and you're kind of stuck and you don't know how to rephrase it, take your work and feed it into multiple different engines and see what it gives you. And you can even take the results of one and feed it to the other, and have the second one critique the first one. And you can get some really insightful stuff. So yeah, it absolutely can help you with creativity. It can help you with writing, but that's all guided still by you in order to really get a great result.
So going back to the energy issue, are we creating a future where maybe only organisations with access to power are going to be able to compete?
Yeah, access to power is a huge issue right now. It's also a very localized issue. Like you were mentioning in Tanzania, not Tanzania, Tasmania, you get a lot of your power from hydro. So that's awesome, right? Hydro is a fantastic source, but that's true everywhere you go. There are going to be more localized energy sources. And the closer you can source your energy, the more efficient it's going to be. In pretty much every form of energy, the transportation cost and the transportation loss of energy is a big cost. So the more that you can produce your energy locally, the better it is. So in every vertical, as you are looking to power whatever your requirements are, you need to look at what are the best closest options, whether that's building new or taking advantage of the local options. That's so localized energy production and cost of transporting in energy will be just foundational discussions for every vertical and every company that wants to grow.
I'm also curious about water as well, because we're hearing a lot about the amount of water that AI data centers use. What are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I think the water discussion is probably blown out of proportion. I think that's maybe media fodder. AI does use a lot of water to cool it. That is true. But for the most part, they're closed systems. So once you provide a data center with the water that it needs, it's not going to continue to have this huge draw on your local water supply. It's going to be a closed water system. That's obviously not true of the energy. The energy needs are ongoing. So you do need to be producing significant additional energy on an ongoing basis. But yeah, I think the energy concern is very real and is an immediate concern. The water, in my mind, is not as big of a concern.
Thank you. No, that's useful to know, because it certainly seems to be leading the news more about the water than about the energy, which I
Yeah, it
find
is.
interesting. So you say that hyperscale isn't just about size, it's about systems thinking. What does systems thinking look like in leadership practice today, in your mind?
I mean, the general concept of systems thinking is you're not looking at an individual topic or an individual tool, in a silo. You're looking at how it fits in within the broader system. So, in today's discussion, we've talked about AI and the different uses of AI and how that might affect energy usage as well as personnel. Are you going to increase productivity? Are you going to reduce headcount? All of those things are consideration, and system thinking is really looking at that whole picture of all of those different things and how do they interconnect. And I think in today's world, if you're leading a major corporation, you need to be looking at all of those things. So there are HR considerations, headcount considerations. There are also energy considerations and IT tech stack considerations, and they all interact together. And the decisions you make in any one of those areas is going to affect the others. So you really should take a holistic view and make the right strategic decisions for your organization.
So it sounds like we're looking at potentially a shift in leadership capability and leadership thinking away from more kind of siloed approach into that broader scanning. What do you think are going to be the key capabilities that leaders will need to operate in that world?
Well, I think that the key leadership characteristics aren't changing. Maybe the decisions that they are making may be changing, or the categories of decisions they're making are different. But I think true leadership, has always needed to view the entire field, make the best strategic decisions for their company, and communicate that strategy and that vision to the team to drive their buy-in and drive their productivity and drive that team. So those high level characteristics have not changed, but they may be making different decisions in different areas than they have in the past.
Yeah, I think the communication aspect is going to be probably really critical going forward, because as we've touched on, there has been conversations in the media about job losses, about, water shortages, energy shortages, and so on. So we're probably going to be, and also what else is going on in the world? We're dealing with employees at the moment who are carrying a certain amount of underlying, I suppose, stress, almost like this concern about the future and what the future looks like. So I think communication for leaders is going to be really critical in terms of how they translate their strategy into things that are understandable, workable, and also reassuring for employees as well. Help them see that there's opportunity in the world rather than things looking gloomy.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's true of both the internal communication to your own employees and your own team, but also externally. With just communication in general today is so instantaneous and so broad that as a leader, you need to be very aware of how the decisions that you are making will impact public perception and your branding and your public relations. So communication is really key. And so, yes, it's both internal communication and external communication. Again, I don't think that's new to leadership. I think it's been a characteristic of leadership forever. Good communicators, it's a key element of leadership. Again, the extent of it and the speed of it may be different, but communication has always been a core leadership tenet.
Yeah. And one that's not done well most of the time. It's one of the things I find whenever we do employee surveying. It's always comes up as either number one or number two as the issues. It's always communication and leadership. And they tend to switch positions. Sometimes one of them will be number one, the other one will be number two, but it's always consistent, certainly here in Australia anyway. It seems to be the key concern of people around communication.
Well, I think data backs that up, not just in your nook of the world, but really globally. I think that's always the case. Employees that feel that they are kept in the dark and out of the loop, yes, when they leave, that's often one of their comments.
Yeah. So going back to power, the shift towards companies generating their own power is really interesting. So does this signal anything about maybe trust in public systems?
I don't think it's necessarily a matter of trusting public systems. It's a shift to distributed power, and it's kind of being driven by necessity. The power grids, again, whether that's North America or Australia or Europe or Asian, power grids were designed to support their local community. And when you have the type of power demand growth that's happening right now, it takes a long time to build grid infrastructure, even just to get the hardware to expand your grid infrastructure. It takes a long time. So if you want to build a data center and it needs massive new energy to support it, which they do, it almost requires a new approach. And so I think we're going to see an era of distributed energy. But at the same time, it's going to drive this huge increase in energy capacity. And that's, when I use the phrase that the next industrial revolution, because we are absolutely driving a massive global increase in energy capacity. But it's also a shift to distributed energy in order to get the energy where you need it. Whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing, I think we will see. But I would suggest it's probably a good thing because of one of the other things we touched upon, which is the cost of transporting energy and the loss of energy during transportation. So distributed energy can be a more efficient system, lower cost for everybody.
Mm. And it's an interesting shift. I mean, it was going back a few years now, it might have been 10 years ago here. We had an opportunity for a big new development, shopping precinct out near our airport. 'Cause airport's out there, it's flat, nothing around it for miles. And the company that was going to build the development pulled out at the last minute because they weren't able to negotiate a power agreement in terms of having the power supply. They were going to need to build new substations and so on to accommodate that. And they couldn't reach an agreement with the government for heavy subsidisation of that. So they just pulled the pin and went elsewhere, which was interesting. So I think it's going to be a really interesting and also critical shift to see companies moving towards this. Is if we want to build something, we're going to have to factor in the power, and we need to do something about building it ourselves rather than relying on somebody else to do it for them.
Yeah, I think we've seen that. That's a great example. It's a perfect example. And I think we've seen that across industries. If you can't get a deal or find local power, either you have to move that project somewhere else, or if it's a project that can only exist in that location, yeah, that project may not move forward. But I think for the big tech companies that are trying to rapidly build out AI data centers, they don't feel that they can make that choice. That they have to build these data centers in order to compete and to provide the services that they're already promising their customers. So they have to find a solution, and so that solution, I think, more and more is building your own power.
Mm.
Whether that's completely off grid or just additional power that can feed power back to the grid.
So, what do you think are the political and maybe ethical implications leaders should be thinking about?
Anytime you start to look at power consumption and power production and interacting with local utilities and local energy costs, it is a political discussion. And local communities are going to lean on their local governments to try to influence either having a data center or not having a data center, or the specifics around how the community will accept this data center in the area. It's definitely a political conversation. There's no doubt about that. But at a high level, it's kind of interesting because we're seeing this convergence of big tech and utilities. And big tech is going from kind of a passive energy consumer to an interactive participant in the grid, in many cases feeding energy back to the grid. So it changes the political landscape because it's not simply a local community, giving up their power to this new player. In many cases, it's adding a new player that's going to change the local energy capacity. And a lot of these data centers will go up in remote areas, right? So you might have a teeny little town, and all of a sudden you're building this massive data center right outside of this little teeny town. Well, that data center might double, triple, quadruple the local tax revenue for that town. So that can have a massive impact. So if you get this huge new data center and the data center brings their own energy capacity and actually reduces your local energy costs, and at the same time drastically increases the tax revenue for that town, allowing you to improve your schools, improve your library, improve public transportation, it can be a really positive thing. I mean, of course, that also kind of sounds like a Pollyanna story, right? It doesn't always turn out that beautifully. There are certainly downsides of, you have this little teeny town, and all of a sudden your traffic is now tripled, and you've got all these construction trucks driving up and down the streets for 5 years while they build this thing. So that, it's not all wonderful, but to your point, that it's also a political discussion. If you have a good local political system and they get good negotiations with this new tech player, there absolutely can be win-win scenarios where the big tech company can get the data center that they need, and it can be a positive for the local community.
Yeah, so I mean, in what's been happening so far, what have you observed in terms of that? Are we talking more positive feeling towards it or more negative feeling towards it from the general community?
Well, I think it comes back to one of our discussions just a couple of minutes ago, which is around the communication, right? There is a story around all of this. And I think companies that are being more proactive with both how they want to build their data center and how they want to bring positive scenarios for the local community and how they communicate that to the local politicians and to the local community can make a big difference, because there are certainly AI data center projects that have been blocked by local communities. And if the drivers behind that, the tech companies and the developers building that data center, do not come up with solutions to satisfy that local community, they can lose that project. They may have to go somewhere else and start over. And perhaps they can take lessons learned around building a plan that provides local positive benefits to the local community and puts together a communication strategy to build local support early in the process. Communities are standing up during the permitting stages when you still have a big open field and they're trying to recategorize that land in order to put commercial in there instead of agriculture or what have you. Communities are getting very up in arms, and then local organizers can be pretty persuasive. And so, yeah, you need a good communication strategy to address that and make sure the local communities see a benefit and you communicate that to them well.
Yeah.
But that also means you're actually bringing a benefit to them, right? You can't sell them a bill of goods if you're going to, in order to have a good communication strategy, you kind of need to have actual positive solutions that you're bringing to those communities.
So what industries outside of tech should really be paying attention to this model? I mean, you mentioned it when we spoke earlier that it's really, or all organizations are going to need to think about this. But if you look at it in terms of, I suppose, tranches, we've got AI and tech leading the pack. What are the other industries that are going to follow?
Any industry that needs land or needs power. I think we're seeing more media focus on real estate and home prices. If you want to build a big multi-family development in a neighborhood, and a big tech company is coming in and buying up land to build a data center, that's going to put upward pressure on the real estate pricing. Also, anybody that needs a lot of power, right? It's always the same discussion that we've had earlier today. How are you going to power your facility, and where are you going to get that power? If the local grid is maxed out and the new data center is building their own power, what are you going to do? How are you going to power your facility? Are you going to move it to a different location, or are you going to explore that same scenario? Because obviously right now we're seeing it with big tech building their own power supplies. But why can't that be in other verticals? If you're building a big manufacturing facility, a big industrial facility, why not look at building your own power? And there's more and more options for that now as well, right? You can build a solar farm or a wind farm. If like in your neck of the woods, if you happen to have hydro, fantastic. But hydro, of course, needs certain geographic requirements, so you can't put them anywhere. You can put them where they work. But solar and wind can be put in a lot of places. Nuclear is becoming more of a kind of localized modular option now. So kind of these small microgrids or small mobile reactors you could put one mini reactor on your facility, and one mini reactor can generate a lot of power, certainly enough to power an AI data center or a new manufacturing facility and supply additional power back to the grid. So there are a lot of really good kind of mobile mini options beyond just trying to tap into whatever the local grid is.
Yeah, nuclear is an interesting one because, again, it's been quite polarizing over the years. It's that whole not in my backyard. People love the idea, but as long as it doesn't get built anywhere near them. What should we realistically expect here?
So there are real concerns around nuclear, right? And they're totally valid. And we've seen, big problems globally. But the micro reactors or the mini reactors do address some of that. In part of it, just the scale is so much smaller. Also, these mini reactors or micro reactors, molten salt reactors are very popular right now, and they have a bunch of safety benefits built in. So there's less likely to be a problem, and if there does happen to be a problem, it's a much smaller problem. I think it is more of a true option, and I totally understand what you're saying. Nobody wants it in their backyard, but nobody wants this huge 3 Mile Island reactor in their backyard. But a little mini reactor that's out on the edge of town by the AI data center that's going to lower my power costs. Okay, well, maybe I'd consider that. So that's a real option. I think that all of these that we're talking or that I'm talking about right now are still fission reactors, right? They're nuclear fission reactors. I think that the potential game changer is the fusion reactor. So fission is when you're splitting an atom to release energy. Fusion is the nuclear reaction that powers the stars and the sun. It's where you're taking two atoms and smashing them together, combining them to release that energy. It's much cleaner, releases a ton of energy. So if we can get to reliable net power positive fusion, that could really be a game changer. And there are companies doing some really interesting things there, probably most notably Helion. So Helion is a nuclear fusion company. They are currently building a big reactor in state of Washington in northwestern United States to power a Microsoft data center. And they are saying that they are going to deliver fusion energy in 2028. I think that's way ahead of, maybe decades ahead of what people thought possible. But if they can, in fact, do that, if they can deliver clean, reliable, abundant fusion energy in 2028, I think that changes the game. And I think people start building fusion infrastructure as fast as they can. It still may take decades to build out the infrastructure, but if we can get to a nuclear fusion world, I think that literally removes energy as a constraint. You get to a true abundant energy future. And I think we'll see, but it's possible.
So what's your feel on how long this might take? They're saying 2028. Do you think that's actually realistic?
I don't know. I really hope so. I'm certainly cheering for them. They have a different approach. The big challenge with nuclear fusion is it takes so much energy to ignite that reaction and get it going that it's been very, very difficult just from physics to put enough energy in there and capture enough energy off of it to make it net energy positive. But Helion has this really interesting approach where they never actually reach ignition. They're not trying to reach ignition. They're actually pulsing energy into the material to generate electricity, and then they're using magnets to capture that energy and pull it off directly. So it's a much more efficient system that doesn't actually require ever igniting the reaction. which is a different approach. And it's been kind of interesting because some physics people are like, hey, that's cheating. You're not reaching reaction. And Helion says, we're not trying to drive physics. We're trying to generate electricity and run a business. So it's really interesting. It's like, the scientist and the business guy, they have different goals. And the Helion is truly or clearly trying to generate energy and build a business around that, opposed to just to drive physics results. So I think it's an interesting discussion, and I've been kind of surprised by the pushback that they get from the scientific field.
Interesting. I quite like that, the idea of it. You're cheating because you're not doing it right versus, well, actually it works, so why do we care?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So how do leaders distinguish between things that are perhaps hype versus something that is really reality and something they should consider investing in? I mean, obviously there's a lot of, interesting things happening, a lot of really interesting technologies appearing. How do we actually tell the difference these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like fusion, right? It's still an unknown. Is it going to work or not? We'll see. So if you're building a factory and you need to be up and producing next year, you should probably not count on fusion. You should look at something else. But if you're an investment company and you want to take a flyer on an investment that might really pay off in the future, it's probably a great place to make a try and put a little money in there. So I think it really depends on what your particular circumstances are. But I mean, if you are literally building a factory and you need it to be up and running next year, you need to look at what are the real energy sources available in your area or the sites that you are looking at, which primarily means what are the energy options in that localized market. Do you have hydro there? Do you have thermal there? Can you build solar there? What are the real options? And I think that can become pretty clear, right? Can you absolutely hire someone to build a solar farm or wind farm or whatever that source is right now? And what's the timeline to get that built? And so I think yes, that's certainly part of the due diligence that leadership needs to perform when they're looking to expand and add a new site. What are the realistic and immediate energy options that you have?
And it's interesting because, like you said, there's lots of different options here in terms of power. Just curious, what are you seeing in terms of innovation in existing things like solar, for example, or hydropower? What are we looking at perhaps in the future?
So there's tons of great innovation going on out there. One that I think is really cool right now is around thermal. So in the past, or thermal energy, you've looked for hot underground water that you can tap into to drive steam and run generators, produce electricity. But thermal has really borrowed a bunch of ideas from the oil and gas industry. So now instead of drilling straight down, they're learning to horizontally drill, which can open up a much broader area that you can address it. Also, they're not just looking for hot water. They now can just look for hot rocks. They can drill down in there, whether that's vertical or horizontal, and they can inject fluid into the rocks and collect the heat. So you're seeing thermal become deployable in a lot more areas and much more efficiently. One of the recent developments in thermal is they figured out, they don't have to pump water down there. They can pump different fluids down there that'll more effectively generate or carry that power back up to the surface. So lots of great things there. So my company is called Woodchuck AI, and Woodchuck, what we do is we use AI image recognition to identify wood in waste streams, and then we segregate that wood and process it into biomass, and we use that biomass to generate electricity. So we're literally using AI to turn waste into clean energy. And I think there's 1,000 more examples of innovations that are taking previous technologies or developing new technologies to make energy more available and to drive efficiency in delivering that energy. And then there's a whole other side of the equation, which is how can we use energy more efficiently? And there's tons of innovations going on that side as well, where we do a better job of using the energy that's available to us. And if we can become more energy efficient, it can actually reduce that accelerating energy growth demand, right? If we can use energy more efficiently, we don't have to grow quite as fast. So there's also tons of innovations going on the energy efficiency side.
Yeah, I came out of the electricity industry myself, and I remember, and I've been out of it for a long time now, but I remember back in the day, we had somebody come in from one of the Scandinavian countries. It escapes me now. It might have been Norway, might have been Denmark, but what they were working on at that time was around educating children. And they had this really interesting idea. It was a bit like a smart screen, I suppose, which you attached to your fridge. And it showed the amount of power that you were using. But what it did was it represented it as an iceberg with penguins sitting on it. And as you started to use more power, the iceberg melted and the penguins started falling off, with the idea that would encourage the kids to run around the house and turn off all the lights so the iceberg would grow again and the penguins could jump back on. So it was, I mean, this was years ago now, but that was the bit that I remember the most. There was a lot of other really interesting things they talked about, but I really like that idea of that sort of, how do we change the mindset of the younger generation to get them to think about, efficient use of power as part of their day-to-day life, rather than something that's for older generations imposed upon us. We came from a generation where nobody really worried about it. My dad used to complain. He used to say, turn the light off when you leave the room, but we never listened. So, I guess getting back to leadership, what does responsible leadership really look like when we've got something that could be really impactful? There's a big scale of impact here. And there's going to be, I suppose, almost like the stewardship of this going forward. What does this really look like for leaders?
I think when we talk about stewardship and kind of the whole discussion around sustainability, I think companies, in general, they want, just as people, they want to do the environmentally responsible thing. But I think there's been this view for a long time that in order to do the environmentally friendly thing, it's going to cost you more money. And I think we're at a point now where we can use technology to drive efficiencies so that doing the environmentally responsible thing does not cost you more. It's being driven by efficiency, which should be reducing cost. Certainly the strategy that we have, or the focus that we have at Woodchuck, is if it's not financially sustainable, it isn't sustainable. So it can't just be environmentally friendly, it has to be financially friendly. And so if we can use technology to drive efficiencies, to improve sustainability, and simultaneously reduce costs, then you're doing the environmentally friendly thing and you're doing the financially responsible thing. And that's a win-win. And I think that's kind of the nexus of all of this explosive energy demand, and how we continue to generate this energy and how do we use it efficiently, looking for efficiencies within that process and looking for cost reductions within that process is fundamental to the discussion. And again, that comes back to the strength of AI. AI is really good at finding efficiencies and driving efficiencies. So to some extent, AI and the desire for more AI is creating this energy demand issue. But ironically, AI can also be the solution to solving it. So it's kind of a exciting place where we are right now. AI is exploding, energy and utility companies are converging, and all of it makes a really exciting, fluid environment. And I think we're in an exciting time. And I'm curious to see where we are in 2 years and 4 years and 5 years. And I think, like you mentioned, ChatGPT didn't come out that long ago, but now it seems like that was forever ago. Things have changed so much. The rate of change is certainly accelerated. So what will we see 2 years from now? Could be totally different again.
Yeah. I've got grandkids, and I'm sort of thinking about, by the time they get to working age, what's it going to look like for them? They're three and two. But is the thing, what does it look like? What's the world of work going to look like when they get to the point where they're, choosing careers? The world's an exciting and interesting place right now. And I like what you said about it, this concept of sustainability being financially sustainable and environmentally sustainable, because we've certainly seen in the media, conversation about the walk back of the environmental legislation, for example, recently. And again, positioning it as environmental legislation is something that constrains companies, stops them from being effective, stops them from being productive. So I really love the conversation moving into the idea that you can actually do both. We should be doing both. And as we move forward into new technologies, that's absolutely possible.
I think that's true. And I think we're seeing two different trends. I think you're right. On the government side, we are seeing a drawback from regulation. But I'm not seeing that on the commercial side. I'm not seeing that on the consumer side. So consumers still care about that more people care about sustainability and want the companies they do business with to be sustainable and be environmentally friendly. And I think because of that, global corporations are not drawing back from that. So I think right now what we're seeing is sustainability and environmental goals are being driven from the corporate agenda, not from the government agenda. And that's fine. That's great, but it is still being driven. And even to the extent where another growing trend is ESG investment. I mean, I guess it's not a growing trend. It's been around for a while, but there's not a pullback on that side either. ESG investment is still continuing to grow and becoming larger and larger. So if you are a big market cap company, if you're a global company, you're selling to consumers, and you can demonstrate and validate that you are making environmentally conscious decisions and you are reducing your carbon footprint, that can increase your ESG rating. And if you are right on the threshold of the next layer where another group of ESG investment vehicles will invest in you, and you can increase your rate just a little teeny bit and open up all that new investment, it can have a really big impact on your market cap. And I think we're seeing more focus or more attention being paid to that by big commercial companies too. So it's both the environmental impact that it can have on your end consumers, as well as the potentially positive impact on your market capitalization. So there's a couple of different areas of impact. So even though we're seeing governments pull back, I don't think we're seeing that same slowdown, certainly not universally across the commercial.
And that's, I think a really good sign, the fact that companies are being given the opportunity to walk back some of the things they're doing, and they're choosing not to do that. They're choosing to actually advance them.
Yeah. I mean, some are. It's not universal, right? Some companies are walking back, but that comes back to some of the other things we talked about too, around leadership and how that's impacting your brand and your strategy and public perception. And again, the stats on consumers, and this isn't a North American thing, or it's kind of global. Globally, more consumers care about the environment and want the companies they're doing business with to do something positive about it than the other way around. So obviously, if you're trying to sell these consumers, you need to be aware of that, and that impacts your strategy and certainly impacts your communication strategy.
How does cost of living play out? Just getting back to the consumer, obviously it's much easier to make those smart consumer choices when there's, I suppose, more of an abundance, in terms of finances. But when cost of living gets really squeezed and it comes down to, I actually can't choose here, I've got to choose the most cost-effective option for me. How do you see that playing out at the moment? Is it making a difference, do you think, or do you think consumers are still being environmentally aware?
I think the reality is what I was saying before. It can't just be environmentally friendly. It has to be financially friendly. So if you're going to make these claims and represent that to your consumers, well, ideally, you are in fact seeing efficiencies from the decisions you're making. And ideally, that has a reductive impact on your final costs. Because if you have two packages right next to each other on the shelf and the consumer has to pick which one to take, there have been study after study after study that whatever consumer says they care about, when they're actually in the store and they've got to pick up one of these two packages, they pick the cheaper one. In the United States, there's this huge argument, right? We have this made in the USA, and people want to buy the products that's made in the USA. But all the data says, when the package is on the shelf, if it says made in the USA on it, but it's more expensive, they're not going to buy it. So if you ask a consumer, do you care about that? Sure, they say they care about it, but they're making a decision based on price. So if you're going to, you have environmentally conscious consumers, but it still has to be price effective for them. If they're exactly the same price, they might choose the environmentally friendly option over the non-environmentally friendly option. If it's cheaper, they will certainly take it. But if it costs them more money to pick the environmentally friendly product, data says that they won't.
Yeah. And we've seen that play out across many industries over the years. I remember it was a bit of a debate in the fashion industry a couple of years ago around conscious fashion choices, and people saying that they don't want, say, for example, sweatshops in Asia. But when it comes down to buying a pair of jeans, they will always choose the cheaper pair that are made in the sweatshop in Asia. So it's almost like we put these blinders on, it's like all very well and good as long as it doesn't actually affect my buying, my actual purchasing. Interesting to see how
Which comes back to leadership and the strategies and decisions we're making, so that what we want to do is make those choices that are really focused on efficiency and waste reduction and cost reduction, so that those efficiencies and cost reductions can translate into your end consumer price, so that you can then give your consumers the option of doing the environmentally friendly thing that also saves them money. That's the win-win.
Absolutely. So is there anything you think that we're perhaps getting wrong right now that we'll regret in maybe 10 years' time?
That's a great question.
Put your future focus goggles on.
I think as we're making energy choices right now, I mean, you said how do we tell that what's real and what isn't? And my answer was basically, what are your actual immediate choices right now? And I think that's true. But you don't necessarily just have one choice. You typically will have multiple choices. And part of that final selection of your choice should look at, what does this look like 10 years from now? So if you're looking to build a new factory and you've got the choice of liquid natural gas or a solar farm with batteries, what's the right choice there? And I think to some extent, that's driving new options. So one of the cool new options or trends that we're seeing is the hybrid energy solutions, which drive efficiencies for both renewables and kind of more traditional fossil options. For example, solar and wind plus liquid natural gas is a pretty efficient system, and it eliminates the need for all of the battery infrastructure. Battery infrastructure is very expensive. So when you build a solar farm, a big percentage of your costs are building the battery infrastructure. But if you pair that solar farm with liquid natural gas, now during the day when the sun is shining, you use your solar power. And at night when the sun goes down, you crank up the gas and you don't need the battery infrastructure. So it drives a more efficient system. It reduces your cost of your solar and takes advantage of liquid natural gas when the solar isn't there. So I think we're going to continue to see innovation drive new choices and better choices that ideally drive efficiencies for both the use of fossil fuels and for your use of your different renewables.
Yeah. So returning to the book, was there anything that shifted in your own thinking while you were researching and writing?
Yeah. So when I first started writing, I was, in the sustainability camp and the renewable camp, and what are realistic choices and how can we make those renewable energy decisions. But I think what I saw through writing these books and really doing all of the research around it is renewables really aren't enough to meet this exploding energy demand. If you look at where we are globally in terms of energy capacity, and you look at the forecast, which basically say we need to double energy capacity globally within the next 20 years. So how do you do that? And if you look just at renewables, if you take all the renewables we have today and triple that capacity, and you can throw nuclear in there too, throw in nuclear and triple our current nuclear capacity. That doesn't double our global energy capacity in the next 20 years, which means if we're going to meet this energy demand, we have to continue to use other sources, which means we're going to need to not just continue to use oil and gas, but we're probably going to have to increase that at least to some percentage, in addition to continuing to ramp up our renewables. And I think that was an eye opener for me. So it's really there is no single silver bullet. Renewables certainly aren't the silver bullet. I think when you're making your energy choices, you really need to look at your localized options. What are your options in your community, in your country? What are the most efficient options for you? Are there hybrid solutions where you can utilize, legacy energy solutions and augment that with renewables that can drive efficiencies and reduce your costs? And I think with the innovation we're seeing, that more and more is a realistic choice. But it does take a little more research and a little more look around. And obviously, there are tons of really smart innovators and entrepreneurs that are driving these solutions and trying to make more of these choices available. And I think that's what's really exciting about where we are right now is I think we will double energy capacity in the next 20 years. But exactly what that mix of energy sources looks like, it's going to be different in every geography, but we're going to get there. And just with the one caveat of if we can actually get to nuclear fusion, that is the silver bullet. That would actually, but that's still a ways off because even if it works right now, like we talked about at the very beginning, building energy infrastructure it takes a long time to do that. So even if we had nuclear fusion today, or if we have nuclear fusion in 2028, it's going to take decades to build out that infrastructure. So how do we power the world in the decades that it takes to build out nuclear fusion? So it's really the same discussion we're having right now. What's the combination of local options across fossil legacy systems and new renewable systems, and how do you drive the most efficient energy choices?
Yeah. So what, I guess in closing, is there any, I suppose, last thoughts you'd like to leave leaders who are potentially watching this?
There's a lot of amazing innovators out there, startups, entrepreneurs that are driving new technologies. And so as you're making these decisions, the decision that you made 6 months ago, or that you were looking at 6 months ago, you may have new options today. I mean, 6 months ago wasn't a long time, and energy landscape hasn't changed very rapidly over the last couple of decades, but right now it's changing fast. So literally your energy options, if you're making site selection right now, and 6 months ago you made an energy decision, you might have new options today that you didn't have 6 months from now. Certainly a year from now, you're going to have different options. 2 years from now, you're going to have more options. So as you're making your energy plan for that facility, you may have an interim solution with a different longer term solution that you implement in the next year or years. So I would say don't make that energy decision and put it on the shelf and be done with it. There may be more efficient cost reduction options that are here now or are coming soon that can have a positive impact on your business.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time. That's been interesting. I mean, from a leadership perspective, and also, like I said, my background in the electricity industry for 15 years, it's sort of fascinating to see how the world's changing. I'm a big supporter of AI. I found it amazing for my business and amazing for my thinking. So it's exciting to see where this is going to go. And like I said before, looking forward to seeing a world for my grandkids and what that's going to look like for them. So thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on. That was a great discussion. We went a lot of different directions. That was
We
fun.
did.
Thank you.